Well, welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming and spending time with me and spending time together this evening. Um, as usual, let's try to take a moment to kind of brush off all of our outside activity of the day, whatever we were doing. We had a good day at work, a bad day at work, maybe a nice dinner before you came to class, maybe you're starving. Whatever is going on, let's try to put those outside so we can spend time together. And even though you may be, in front of a computer or a television or a phone in an office, in a living room, a dining room, try to think of yourself as being in a sacred space, the same you would if you're a temple to receive a teaching, to engage in the study of the Dharma. And so we put our mind into a place that is open to receiving the Dharma. And we set a strong motivation. So think, I've come together this evening to join in this class, to work on my mind, to learn about Bodhichitta, not for my own benefit alone, but so that I might benefit all sentient beings. I recognize that in my current state, my ability to help others is limited. And so by studying the teachings of the Buddha and by learning how to practice, I will achieve greater wisdom and insight and new methods and eventually the state of Buddhahood, and do this all so I might have the most ways of benefiting others. So I don't come here tonight just for myself, my own peace and happiness, but so that I might be of benefit to all sentient beings. So set that strong motivation for coming together this evening. And we'll start just by offering verses of refuge in Bodhicitta very quickly in English. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha. Great. So with that, we have set a strong motivation and tried to make our practice virtuous in the beginning. So I'm very happy to be here in this sixth and final class. The time has flown by, and I'm very happy to see all of you with me this evening. It's, so wonderful for you to be able to make time to do this. And I think I might have mentioned this last week, but truly, there are so many things we could be doing besides studying Dharma, besides living a spiritual life. Samsara is filled with these deceptive pleasures. And so to take time out of your day to come together to engage in the study of a spiritual path is a really incredible thing. And so I'm so happy that you could be here with me and that you've taken the time to do this today. It's very meaningful to me to see others who are dedicated to living a spiritual life and to trying to learn and study and practice. So I'm very glad that I could be here with you to share in that time together. Very quickly, some housekeeping before we start, because I have noticed I'm not good at time management. So let's do the housekeeping right up front. So there's no homework this week, obviously, since it's our last week, but I do have some recommended readings you can continue as you go forward. And what I'm going to do is all of them I have this week are PDFs. And all of them you can download from the FPMT website, the store, but I'm just going to upload them into the chat now. So you'd be able to download them from the chat as you're ready. I'm going to include the course packet that we have from their website as well. So all of the collection of readings we've been doing throughout the whole time together. So hold on, sorry, let me deal with technology. Here we go. So I'm uploading a bunch of files right now that you can download as you wish. One of them is going to be the verse for taking the Bodhisattva vows. It's actually a file that has the Bodhisattva vows and the Tantric vows, but so the 12-line verse for the Bodhisattva vows is there. That's one of them. One is a a small book explaining the 18 root bodhisattva vows and the 46 secondary vows, which we're going to talk about later today, but so that way you have it in writing, which is very nice. There's one that is a text about generating bodhicitta by Rinpoche, which is really wonderful. There is a book by Lama Yeshe and a book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, both of which I was going to give you articles that are on the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, but instead the whole book is available. And so those two that are there. There's a wonderful practice called the ever-flowing nectar of bodhicitta, which is a meditation on defeating the self-cherishing mind using bodhicitta that Lama Zopa Rinpoche has compiled together that incorporates some of the mind training verses. That's a really wonderful practice. And there is a wonderful short text that Lama Zopa composed called How to Be Mindful of Bodhicitta in Your Daily Activities. And so those are all there for you to download. Now, those are all available for free as well. If you go to shop.fpmt.org, they're all available as PDF downloads. And if you just search for the word Bodhi, B-O-D-H-I, you'll find all those PDFs there, as well as some others. But I thought I'd put them here so you don't have to do that. So let's get that out of the way. Okay. So with that, as we begin our time together, let me get some of the housekeeping out of the way. Let's try to keep to mind whenever we engage in a Dharma teaching, we want to avoid the three faults of a broken vessel. So we don't want to be like a vessel that is overturned, which is to say, we want to be open and receptive to the teachings. We don't want to be like a vessel that's stained on the inside. So we don't want to have preconceptions. We don't want to have ideas about the teacher or the teachings before coming in, but have an open mind. So not only are we receptive and welcoming, but we have an open mind, and we aren't allowing our defiled minds, such as attachment or jealousy or pride, to shape our experience. And lastly, we want to avoid the fault of being like a vessel with a hole in it. So we are attentive, we try to maintain a mindfulness, and we try to apply the teachings in some way as soon as we hear them to commit them into our mind so they don't just kind of go in and then flow out again. So whenever we engage in any teaching of the Dharma, we want to try to apply these three principles. And in the same way, when we try to study, we want to, since it's such a vast topic, we want to maintain three attitudes. One is the attitude of the long view or the big picture, which is that we know that our goal is Buddhahood. So that is always the big picture, is that everything we're doing, we're working for Buddhahood, for ourselves and for all sentient beings. No matter how fine detailed the minutia might be, we might feel like we're in the weeds, but we have to keep this big picture view that what we're working for is to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings so that all sentient beings might abide in the perfect and unending bliss of Buddhahood, ourselves included. So that's the big view. So we have to have that attitude. We have to have the attitude that's the extensive view, the recognition that the distance between here and Buddhahood is quite far. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of things to study, a lot of subjects to meditate on. So there's a lot of small pieces. And so we don't want to be overwhelmed by them. So being aware that what we're doing is a small part of the practice and we can rejoice in our practice, but also knowing that it's a long practice. It's lifetimes of practice. And we enter into that joyfully. So we have the long view or the big picture, as well as the extensive view. But then those all get tempered by the relaxed view. Right? The recognition that we're doing the best we can do, that we're human beings living in samsara. And so because of that, we can't do everything at the same time. We're not going to become Buddhists tomorrow. So we can't beat ourselves up that we don't understand everything perfectly. We can't beat ourselves up that we can't do everything. So we have to have this relaxed view, as the Tibetans say, just go slow. Okay? So you have to have a relaxed view. And when you combine the relaxed view and the extensive view, then it really lets your practice move forward. The extensive view propels you to keep going forward, practicing, studying more and more. And the relaxed view lets you do it without being tight, without getting tensed up or stressed. So we want to adopt these three views. And lastly, we just want to remember something that I try to think of all the time is that when we engage in new material, the Dharma, we talk about these three ways of engaging material. Tu sam gom sum, right? The hearing or studying, and then contemplating, and then meditating. So you hear those three over and over and over again. And so hearing or studying is when we engage with new material, new Dharma material especially, but can be anything. So something we don't know or don't understand well, the first time we start studying it and learning it, that's hearing or studying. So that's the first step. Whenever we're engaging or studying something new, we have to have access to it. And then contemplating. So contemplating means we use our critical mind to say, does this make sense to me? What are my doubts about this? You know, it's not being cynical. Being cynical always has like an air of superiority or distrust, you know, but being critical and saying, does this make sense to me? How do all these pieces fit together? And so first you learn something new, and then you analyze it critically and you try to investigate it with the contemplating mind. And then once you gain some certainty in it, that is where meditation comes in. So once you have some certainty, even if it's not 100% certainty, but you have some confidence, then you begin meditating on it. You know, in Tibetan, the word for meditating is gom. And gom means to become familiar with something. So when we meditate on something, what we're doing is making that familiar with our mind. So we're taking whatever meditation subject we're studying, and we're making it familiar with our mind. So it becomes inseparable from our mind. And I use these three ways of approaching anything I'm studying, whether it's Dharma or not. You know, whenever I come to a new task, first I have to learn what it is. I have to understand it. And then I have to try to get my bearings, see if it makes sense to me, see what doesn't make sense, try to make sure I understand how all the pieces fit together. And then I practice it. And then I put effort into really making it inseparable from my mind. So that's what we need to do with all the things we study. And that's especially true for Bodhicitta, because Bodhicitta is so easy to talk about. You know, of all the topics, you know, when we talk about Bodhicitta versus wisdom, especially, and understanding emptiness, Bodhicitta is very easy to talk about. But you can get a lot of doubts as how would you actually use bodhicitta in some situations? How would a bodhisattva really act? And then how can we make that part of our daily life and our daily practice? So we need to think about those things. When I was, I remember once when I was in Boston at the center there, at Kurukula Center, the Geshe was teaching on the 37 practices of Bodhisattva, which is a text by Tome Zampo. Really wonderful text that combines all the stages of the path along with Lojong practice. And after one of the verses, one of the students asked him, she said, Geshe-la, I understand all what you're saying, but what about sometimes when you just really need to sue somebody, when they've hurt you and you need to sue them? And he laughed a little bit and he looked at her and he goes, well, you know, maybe sometimes you need to sue somebody, but a bodhisattva never has to. And you could tell she wasn't very satisfied with that answer. But I can appreciate her position. Her position is we live in the world and we often have a strong sense of justice, right? And a sense of when someone has done something wrong, that they want to be held accountable for it. And so sometimes you feel like living in the world that I do, when I have these experiences, shouldn't I react in a way that's appropriate? And in some cases, I suppose, I don't know why suing somebody was her go-to thought, but you know, sometimes we have to take action like that was her thought. So his point was a bodhisattva has no self-cherishing at all, right? Has totally defeated the self-cherishing mind. And so by defeating the self-cherishing mind and having a mind that's always working for the benefit of others, you wouldn't experience anyone harming you as actual harm, right? Because you don't have any attachment to your ego, to your pride, to ideas of wealth or status. Those are all worldly minds. So a bodhisattva would never feel the need to retaliate against harm. You know, one of the primary characteristics of bodhisattva is that when harmed, they don't retaliate with harm. When someone acts in anger towards them, they don't retaliate with anger. You know, when someone uses harsh words toward them, they don't return harsh words in response. So a bodhisattva always has this mind of pure equanimity that sees that all sentient beings are suffering and that all they want is happiness and not to be suffering, but they're confused and don't know how to find that happiness. So a bodhisattva would never have a mind that says, I should sue someone or do something like this. Yet, we do say we need to find that balance of trying to always protect other beings. So if someone's engaging in harmful action and we can take action that can help prevent them from harming others, then we find a peaceful way to do that. So that is a possibility that a bodhisattva would do. But the idea of doing something purely for one's own benefit, even if one has been wronged, So even if it's justified, if someone does something harmful towards you, right, and there's no basis for it, never mind in the Dharma, just in reality, they're acting, you know, in a manner that doesn't seem like it has any basis. So you may be justified in feeling hurt and saying that their actions are totally out of line. But just because you're justified in that doesn't mean that a response is beneficial. Because when you respond in that way, all you're doing is feeding your self-cherishing mind instead of trying to get rid of it. So whether you're justified or not, and whether their actions were intended to be harmful or not, we need to have a mind of a bodhisattva that says, my place is to love other sentient beings and to work for them to be free from suffering. And these actions they're doing are expressions of their own suffering. So that's more important to me than my mind that grasps onto my ego and says, I don't want to be insulted. I want to have only compliments. I don't want to have someone, you know, look at me as lower in status, or I don't want to have someone maybe take away something that's important to me. Those are all self-cherishing minds, that they're concerned with the here and now, this immediate moment only. Me, mine, mine. You know, they're clinging to the present moment in a way, and they're clinging to this idea of me as a really, truly existing being that needs to be kind of treated so kindly, you know, with kid gloves, with, you know, satin sheets and so forth. That's not beneficial. It may feel beneficial in the moment, and it may feel like justice or retribution, you know, but in the end, all you're doing is harming yourself by engaging in these things. So bodhicitta, we have to learn, how do we actually apply it in our lives? How do we live with it? What does a bodhisattva actually do? Because what bodhicitta does is it defeats the self-cherishing mind. And we talked about the self-cherishing mind a lot and how it's different than the self-grasping mind, right? The self-grasping mind, the mind that actually believes that I truly exist, that is, we say, is the root of samsara. But closely coming from that self-cherishing mind, the mind that grasps me as inherently or truly existing, is the self-cherishing mind. The mind that says, I'm more important than everyone else. And as we practice in the meditation for exchanging self and others that we did last week, and we've been studying, one of the key components of that meditation practice is once we recognize our self-cherishing mind, we exchange that for a mind that cherishes others as more important than ourselves, right? Because the self-cherishing mind doesn't do anything to benefit us or to benefit other sentient beings. All it does is harm us. You know, all it does is create rebirths in negative realms and create suffering in this life. So it harms us in this life and in future lives. And so bodhicitta is the exact opposite. Bodhicitta is, I'm going to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, not for myself, but for everyone else. That is why I'm working. So every action I do is not for me. Every action I do is for others. So when that mind is present, even some contrived version of it, there's no space for self-cherishing, right? You've totally eliminated the capacity for self-cherishing when all of your actions are focused on benefiting others. So if you want peace and happiness in this life, you need to practice bodhicitta and cherishing others. And if you want peace and happiness in future lives, you need to practice bodhicitta and cherishing others. You know, they say that if we look at all of the kind of meditative technologies Buddhism teaches, bodhicitta is more powerful and more important than even deity yoga or high tantric practices, you know? Because if you don't have bodhicitta, all those practices are without any substance. No matter how well you can train your mind, if there's still a mind grasping at myself as more important than others, that's infiltrating your meditation practices. It doesn't matter how like subtly and strongly you've refined your mental, acumen and how strong your meditation is, how good your visualizations are. Bodhicitta needs to be the bedrock upon which all of our practice is built. So that's why it's more powerful in that way than even tantric meditation. And you know, a lot of people like to think that, well, the idea of compassion and bodhicitta, that must be our natural way of being. So we should just be able to find it by default. But the truth is, the natural nature of our mind is not one of compassion. You know, our mind, they say mind is clear and knowing. That's what defines a mind. A mind is clear in the sense that it's formless, and it's knowing in the sense that its function is to understand the objects that it engaged with. That's what minds do, both, primary minds and secondary minds. And we often talk about the sky-like mind. We say the nature of the mind is pure and clear. So just like the sky, we may have diluted minds like clouds that fill our headspace, right? And but they come and they go. The nature of the sky isn't the nature of clouds. Clouds are what we call adventitious minds, moving in and out. So all of our delusions are adventitious minds. They're minds that occur due to circumstances, both circumstances external to ourselves and circumstances of our own ignorance, right? But they aren't the actual nature of our mind. My mind is not the anger I experience. It is not the attachment I experience. In the same way, it's not the love or compassion I experience. The mind is open. So compassion takes work. It isn't our default setting. We have to put effort into compassion. And the reason for that is samsara is difficult. Life is hard. And sometimes it feels easier just to give in to the self-cherishing mind, which is the opposite of compassion, wishing for others to be free from suffering and all the causes of suffering. So compassion takes work. I remind myself of this a lot because, most of us haven't achieved a level of compassion where it's effortless. It takes effort. Great compassion, the compassion that really wishes for all sentient beings to be free from all suffering and is uncontrived, is effortless. That takes a lot of time to get to there. So until we achieve that, we have to put effort into our compassion. And sometimes it feels like I'm not making any progress because I experience harmful sentient beings and my first thought is like frustration with them, right? I don't have compassion immediately. But luckily I've practiced enough that usually I can see that frustration, and before I can let it grow, I can cut it off. And I can force myself to experience compassion. And it feels contrived, because it is contrived, because it's not my natural way of being, because I'm a suffering sentient being and I'm doing my best, but I still have a long way to go. So it takes effort. It doesn't come naturally. And as the more you practice it, then it is easier and easier. And then it becomes natural. As I was saying, we meditate, we become familiar with something. His Holiness, at a recent teaching I was at last year, His Holiness was giving a teaching or a transmission of the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, which is a text on logic. This is in Dharamsala. But it's a very difficult text to understand, and it was a 3-day teaching. So he didn't actually teach anything from the Pramanavartika. He just gave the oral transmission of it. And then in between the oral transmission, the first day, he gave teachings about emptiness. Then the second day, he gave teachings on bodhicitta. And the third day, he gave teachings on why it's important to combine those two. And so he mentioned over and over again how important it is that when we meditate on compassion more and more, it becomes inseparable from our mind. So we don't want to just think of compassion and bodhicitta. We want to feel it in our body. We want to make it what this is, rochik, so of one taste with our mind. But that takes effort. So that's why we meditate every day. That's why we put in the effort now. We do the steps to develop bodhicitta. And even though this may be contrived at this point, the more we do it, the less effort it takes, And the more we practice bodhicitta towards, the more we develop equanimity. So we see that there's no distinction between stranger, friend, and enemy, except these projected labels. The more we are able to do that, the easier it is to practice bodhicitta and compassion towards sentient beings who may want to harm us. And it becomes easier and easier. So it isn't easy, Now, some of us may have a predilection for compassion. And this would be due to maybe imprints from past lives, having practiced it in the past, and also due to our environment in this life growing up, we may have these imprints of compassion that ripen. So for some people, it is easier than others. That's definitely true. So you may find that compassion is very easy for you, or compassion towards some types of beings are easy for you. I have a friend, I won't say his name, but he's kind of very ornery, and he likes to pick on people, and he's very, very loving, but he's also very judgmental of people, or at least he presents that way. But you see him with little children and with animals, and he turns into this goop of this swaddling person who's so kind, and he exudes gooey love and compassion. And it's because animals and babies are very easy to have love and compassion to, right? Because they can't argue back with you. But so for him, compassion is his natural instinct towards some types of beings, but towards others, it's a little bit more below the surface and takes more work. And so that may be how it is for us. And that's fine, because if we can see there are some experiences where compassion is easy, where bodhicitta is easy, and some where it's more difficult, then we say, well, why is it easy here and difficult here? And how can I equalize those two? So I always have this easy access to compassion. So we've talked a lot about how to develop bodhicitta. That's kind of the point of this module, Discovering Buddhism. And so since this is our last class, we're doing a little bit of a review, but then we're also, sorry, I need a clock so I don't lose track of time, even though I will lose track of time anyway, but okay. What I wanted to do today, in addition to this review, is we'll go over how to practice bodhicitta. And the easiest way to learn about that is to learn about the 6 perfections, which is one of the readings I had suggested for last week. We learn about the 6 perfections and we learn about the bodhisattva vows. And I think that the Geshe at the center gave bodhisattva vows last weekend. So some of you may be familiar with them, but it'd be good to talk about them. There are a lot of them. There's 18 root downfalls and 46 secondary vows. So we won't go over all of the 46, but we'll go over the 18 and we'll do a broad overview of the others. And like I said, one of the files I put into the chat has all of them. But so to review, we talk about bodhicitta, right? First, we say there's 2 bodhicittas, ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. And ultimate bodhicitta isn't actually bodhicitta, but it is the mind that directly realizes emptiness in the mind, in the continuum of Arya being or a superior being who's on the Mahayana path. So it's called ultimate bodhicitta, but what it really is a mind that directly realizes emptiness. So it doesn't realize it by means of any generalities or by means of inference. It realizes it directly, and it exists in the continuum of an Arya being, a Pakpa, as we say in Tibetan. So someone who's achieved the path of seeing or above on the Mahayana path. So that mind is always conjoined with conventional bodhicitta, right? Because conventional bodhicitta is what marks a bodhisattva. When you achieve the first of the 5 Mahayana paths is when you actually have uncontrived bodhicitta in your mind. So usually when we mention bodhicitta, what we're talking about is conventional bodhicitta. But so when you read in teachings say you need to develop the 2 bodhicittas, what they mean is the bodhicitta that we're talking about, conventional bodhicitta, that is the wish to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, that's based on love and compassion, great compassion as its primary cause. So that's conventional bodhicitta. And then ultimate bodhicitta, the understanding the nature of reality, having direct realizations into emptiness. We need to cultivate both of those together because one of them on their own isn't enough to become a Buddha, And actually wisdom, understanding emptiness, trying to say that is very difficult. Nagarjuna says in his text, the fundamental verses from the middle, so one of the root texts we use for Madhyamaka philosophy, he says, what is it? He says, emptiness that is viewed mistakenly dooms those of weak intelligence. In the same way that a snake held the wrong way or spells that are incanted incorrectly. So emptiness is very difficult to understand. And it's very easy, if you don't understand it well, to slip into nihilism or nihilism, right? To think nothing exists at all, nothing matters anymore. So that is one of the dangers of studying emptiness. It's one of the reasons that His Holiness doesn't recommend, like when he has a lot of non-Buddhist, especially Christians who want to study with him and practice with him and who want to learn emptiness, he says, no, this isn't for you. This isn't something you need to study, especially for people that don't believe in Buddhism. It can disturb their minds. And in fact, one of the bodhisattva vows is not to teach emptiness to people who are not prepared for it or ready for it, because you can cause them to have wrong views. So ultimate bodhicitta is very difficult, but conventional bodhicitta is difficult to actually manifest in our minds, but it's easy to understand, and it can never lead you down the wrong path. If bodhicitta is your guiding light, you're never going to be going down the wrong path. So bodhicitta is divided into 2, ultimate, conventional. Conventional bodhicitta that we're studying is often divided into 2, aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. So in the mind of a bodhisattva, once they reach the second path and there's no possibility for their bodhisattva vows to degrade, then whenever they have engaged bodhicitta in their minds almost all the time. So engaged, the way we talk about engaged and wishing bodhicitta, the difference is exactly like the name sounds. One of them is the wish to do something, and one of them is acting on that thing. So, engaged bodhicitta is like the wish, I'm thirsty, I wish I had a drink of water right now. And then engaged bodhicitta is drinking that water. So we talk about it that way. That's in the minds of ordinary beings. And a bodhisattva, the real difference is engaged bodhicitta is manifest. Okay? So engaged bodhicitta is bodhicitta that is directly connected and manifest with the practice of the 6 perfections. So when a bodhisattva is in meditative equipoise, the only active mind at that point, the only manifest mind, is their mind meditating on emptiness. And because of that, at that moment, we say that their bodhicitta is actually wishing bodhicitta, because it's not active. The only active mind they have at that point is the mind that's focused on emptiness when they're in meditative equipoise. But when they're not in meditative equipoise, then their bodhicitta is always manifest. It's always active. And so then it becomes engaged bodhicitta. So for bodhisattvas, that's the distinction. Now, for those of us that aren't yet bodhisattvas, we don't have real bodhicitta, right? We have some contrived bodhicitta, the taste of bodhicitta. And so for us, the distinction between wishing and engaging bodhicitta is, as I mentioned before, it's the wish to be doing something to benefit others, and then the bodhicitta that actually is propelling us to engage in beneficial actions towards others. But we can remember that when we're trying to benefit others, we do that by taming our mind. That's the most benefit we can do. So just when I say engage bodhicitta, it doesn't mean that you're out on the street, giving things away and doing activism work. Okay, that's part of it, definitely. But even every day, focusing on your mind, trying to improve your mind and your heart, right? That is engaged bodhicitta, or it can be. So then we have these two, engaged and wishing bodhicitta. When we talk about the bodhisattva vows, the vows are all fall into how to protect that engaged bodhicitta. And then there are, before the vows, we have different attitudes and actions to adopt and abandon that are to preserve wishing bodhicitta. So we'll talk about that when we get to the vows. And then the last thing you'll hear is bodhicitta that is like the skin of a sugarcane plant. And so what that's referencing is the contrived bodhicitta. So just like sugarcane is sweet due to the pith, right? The center of a sugarcane stalk is where the sweetness is, the flavor. But the skin on the outside, the bark, has a little bit of sweetness just due to its proximity. So when you're able to develop bodhicitta, but only when you're meditating on it, that is a contrived type of bodhicitta that takes effort. So it's similar to bodhicitta in the same way the sweetness from the bark of a sugarcane plant is similar to the sweetness on the inside. But it's not actual bodhicitta. But it's a step, right? It's us moving in the right direction. So these are the many divisions we talk about with bodhicitta. So the bodhisattva vows are meant to protect our engaged bodhicitta. So we say, well, I don't have bodhicitta in my continuum. What's the point of taking the bodhisattva vows? Well, even this contrived bodhicitta, this kind of bodhicitta we make up that we're just aspiring towards, that is a suitable basis to take the vows, okay? If you had to wait until you actually had bodhicitta in your continuum to take the bodhisattva vows, then we'd never take them, because they work, taking the bodhisattva vows strengthens our bodhicitta. It teaches us how to live in the world with bodhicitta more actively and not let it degrade. So those vows, living in the vows, causes our bodhicitta, whatever we have, to strengthen, to grow. It's like the water and the fertilizer on that little seed that we've planted. So they work together, It's not like you need one then the other. It's all working in synergy. So to think that, well, I don't have enough of a mind compassion, I'm not going to take the bodhisattva vows now because my compassion is too weak. That's kind of missing the point a little bit, You need to do both at the same time, and they work to benefit each other in that way. We need to practice bodhicitta at every moment. So the bodhisattva vows help us do that. And studying the 6 perfections, the paramitas, help us do that. Another thing that helps, what Lama Zopa has composed, and this is one of the files I sent to you, is how to be mindful of bodhicitta in everyday life. And so Lama Zopa gives these like little sayings or almost mantras, you can say, for everything you're doing. So for instance, when you wake up in the morning, you say, what's the one for waking up? Well, as I rise out of bed, may I rise out of the lower realms and bring all sentient beings to higher states of rebirth. And when you leave a room and close the door, you say, I'm closing the door to the lower realms for all sentient beings, or I'm opening the door to happiness and bliss for all sentient beings, And it's silly little mantras you say. So no matter what your daily activities are, you're using your mind to align it towards bodhicitta, towards others, while you do them. And I know some of them, for me, when you first read them, they feel silly. It feels very new agey, like I'm just willing something into being and it's not real. But the truth is, we need to develop the habit where our first instinct is bodhicitta. And the way we develop that habit is by things like this. With everything I do, I need to have a bodhicitta mind. And right now, that is not the way I operate. So if I have these little sayings, I'm tightening my belt, our robes are held up by a belt. So this is the belt of discipline that will protect me from all the negative minds, And when I say little things like that, it reminds me that my mind should be aligned with bodhicitta, right? So it may feel contrived. That's because it is contrived, but that's okay. Because it's going to be contrived until it isn't. You know what I mean? It's going to take that effort before it becomes natural. So that's a really, really wonderful practice that Lama Zopa Rinpoche has offered for us. And so I highly recommend reading through it. And even if some of it feels a little silly to be kind of muttering to yourself as you go about your daily activities, I promise that the more you do it, it does have an impact on your mind. Because we need to have bodhicitta in everything we do. When we're hanging out and watching Netflix, we need to have bodhicitta. And when we're in really boring meetings with our bosses, we need to have bodhicitta. And when we are enjoying a family meal with friends and family and loved ones, we need to have bodhicitta. It doesn't matter what we're doing. When we're going to vote, when we are engaging in civil politics, or when we're engaging in activism, we need to have bodhicitta. One of my first teachers at university was a woman named Jan Willis, who you might have heard of. She was one of Lama Yeshe's early students. And it just so happened that she was one of the first teachers who taught me Buddhism at a university level. And then that was where my connection with Lama Zopa started, before I even realized it. And she is an incredible woman. She actually has an autobiography out that I really recommend called Dreaming Me. But she was a Black Panther for a while. And she was at the riot at Kent State. And she had a chance to meet the Dharma and became a devotee of Lama Yeshe. And she was talking about how she was in Dharamsala and she got to meet His Holiness. Because back in the day, anyone could meet with His Holiness for a private audience, very easily. You'd see His Holiness's secretary walking down the street and you'd say, oh, hey, can I have an interview? And they'd say, yeah, come tomorrow at 3. And anyone could just drop in. And it's not that easy these days. But so she said she had an interview with His Holiness. And she asked him, how could she have bodhisattva vows and practice the life of bodhicitta, but still be protesting against the police violence, against marginalized people and minorities in America? And how could she go to these protests and stand across a line of police who only wanted to hurt her and her friends? And how could she do that with bodhicitta? Is that possible? Or did she have to give up her bodhisattva vows if she wanted to work for equality and justice? And His Holiness said, of course you can. But when you stand across that line of police who want to hurt you and you are defying them, you have to love them while you do it. You can't have any anger towards them or any hatred towards them. You can want to stop them from committing acts of violence. You can want equality for all people. You want to get rid of systemic racism, but you have to love those police who you're up against, who you're protesting against. All of the politicians who enact laws that harm you, you have to love them. All of the members of the KKK and other white supremacist groups who do nothing but stoke fear and hatred, you have to love all of them. That's what it means to live with bodhicitta. So you can protest their actions. You can work to make society better for all sentient beings. And when there's harm and injustice happening, you can have a compassionate outrage that insists you work against that. But you have to have love for everyone while you do it. You can't pick and choose. So we need bodhicitta to pervade every moment, even the most difficult moments. That's when it's most important. And if we're not able to at least actively have bodhicitta and compassion, then we should be working on our self-cherishing mind. And those two work together, right? So we talked about the 8 worldly concerns, right? And if you've been taking other courses in this series, probably on the course on renunciation, they probably discussed the 8 worldly concerns as well. So the 8 worldly concerns are 4 pairs of things that we are constantly attracted to and trying to abandon. So we are attracted to pleasure and we are trying to avoid pain or displeasure. We are attracted to gain. We seek out gain and profit, and we try to avoid loss. We seek out and are attached to compliments and praise, and we try to avoid criticism and insults. And we seek out fame or a high status, and we try to avoid infamy, right? Or a bad reputation. So these 8 minds pervade almost all of our actions without us realizing it. And anytime one of our actions is motivated by one of the 8 worldly concerns, then it's not a Dharma action. You know, if the reason I was here today offering this course is because I wanted you to think of what a great teacher I am, and I wanted to build up a reputation for like a wonderful Dharma teacher, then it wouldn't be Dharma what I was doing. Regardless of the words I say or the robes I wear, if my mind is focused on my own well-being, my own reputation, I want people to like me, compliment me, that's not a Dharma activity. So even if the external action might look virtuous, if it's tainted by a worldly mind, one of these 8 worldly minds, then it's actually an act of self-cherishing. And no act of self-cherishing is beneficial. So sometimes when it's hard to develop bodhicitta or compassion, especially if someone's harming us, then we take a step back and we say, well, the reason it's hard to develop bodhicitta is because they are challenging my self-cherishing mind. So which one of these self-cherishing minds is acting up right now? Why am I responding the way I am? Why does my ego feel threatened? So before you can develop bodhicitta, sometimes it's helpful to try to figure out which of these 8 self-cherishing minds, 8 worthy dharmas am I pursuing? And once you realize that, you can say, well, how is this benefiting me? How is this mind that's constantly seeking out, my own profit? How does that benefit me? This mind that's constantly seeking out praises from others, or me running myself in circles to try to avoid people criticizing me. How is that benefiting me? And when you can analyze that, then it gives you more space to have compassion and bodhicitta. For others, it's the other way around. For others, to see those self-cherishing minds is very difficult. But when you bring about compassion and bodhicitta, then those self-cherishing minds become more evident. So you have to put it into your practice and see which is more useful for you. That's why there isn't one practice. They work together, But we need both of them. And bodhicitta is the antidote to the self-cherishing minds. But sometimes it's easier to start. And you really ask, how is this benefiting me in this life? What is this doing for me? And you'll see ultimately, it's not benefiting us in any way. It's only causing hardship. It might give us the veneer of benefit, but it's temporary. It's worldly. It doesn't last. We can't take it with us. So how is this benefiting me? And once you are able to realize it isn't, through, like I said, you have first your study. Now this is your contemplation. How is this benefiting me? I've come to the realization that I have this mind that's cherishing myself in some way. How is it benefiting me? How is it harming me? That's the act of contemplation. And once you develop some certainty, then you engage in the act of meditation. I know this is not benefiting me. So you make your mind more familiar with getting rid of that self-cherishing mind and with replacing it with a mind of compassion. So how can we make sure all of our activities are Dharma? Well, besides just seeking out the self-cherishing mind and trying our best to repel it at every moment, the 6 perfections are a good guideline. So the 6 perfected activities of bodhisattvas, the 6 paramitas, they're called, are these 6 activities that are the natural way to accumulate merit. And so they were talked about in the reading for last week. They're very famous, so I'm sure you've heard of them before. So the 6 are, the first is generosity, and then morality or ethical discipline, and then patience, then vigilance or endurance or joyful effort, it's sometimes called, was the first 4, then concentration, and then wisdom. So these 6 activities, you call them perfections. In Tibetan, the word is paro tu chimpa. So having gone to the far side or the far shore. So that means when you perfect something, and in Sanskrit it's paramita, which has a very similar meaning. But paro means like the far distance, tu chimpa, having gone there. So that's what it means by a perfected activity. When we've completed the actual meaning of this. So if we go through them, what do we mean by generosity? Well, generosity isn't simply giving things away. Generosity is a mind. So generosity is the mind that wants to give to others. Okay? That's more important. It's not the physical act of giving. You can give things away all day long and never practice generosity. Generosity is the mind that wants to give. So that's what's most important to remember. And it comes from having a mental factor of non-attachment. From there, you're able to develop generosity. And what generosity does is it benefits others, but it also serves as the cause for your own, in future lives, to have, they say, a beautiful body and excellent wealth. Because the more possessions you have, the more you can give. So it serves the function of accumulating merit while benefiting others in that way. But when we talk about generosity, we say there's 3 types of generosity. And of the 3, generosity of worldly things or of possessions or of material things is the least powerful of the 3. That's the first one. So giving of material things. But then the second one is giving of protection. So protecting sentient beings who are going to be harmed. And there's many ways we can do this, you know. This is a very common practice that Lama Zopa Rinpoche has encouraged, which is called animal liberation. So it's, you find animals that are meant to be slaughtered for food, you know, or used for like live bait or something, and you buy them and then you give them Dharma imprints and then you set them free. And so this is animal liberation, is giving them the generosity of protection. But also the generosity of protection is helping calm people's minds so they don't have fear. Right? So they don't have fear of the lower realms. They don't have fear in this life. But then the most profound type of generosity is the giving of Dharma. So you have giving of material things, giving of fearlessness or protection, and the giving of Dharma. And giving of Dharma is the most profound type of generosity. And so you might think, well, I don't have a strong understanding of Dharma. How can I give Dharma to other people? You know, I'm not a teacher. I'm not, you know, that's not my role. We can all give Dharma to others. Even just the simple advice and comfort we give to those who are in need, you know. We don't have to preach the teachings of the Buddha to give Dharma. That's not what it means. It can mean that, definitely. But also, just being present with people and showing them love and compassion in a way that is in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha, and giving advice that may not have any Buddhist language at all, but it still is in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha, that's giving Dharma. You don't need to use Buddhist language to give the Dharma. That's the most profound teaching you have. Because what the Dharma does is it doesn't just help them in this life. The Dharma helps us in future lives. The Dharma brings us to Buddhahood. So by giving the gift to the Dharma, it's like the gift that never stops giving. It's not just allowing immediate benefit, but perpetual, never-ending benefit from the Dharma. So when we think about how could we incorporate generosity into our lives, obviously if some of us have the material means, You can make contributions to causes that you think are beneficial to help others. You can make offerings to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to your local spiritual leaders. Those are all things you can do if you have the financial means to do so. And it's useful, beneficial too. But more important, giving fearlessness. So protecting those who are going to be harmed. Providing a sense of calm and relief and protection to those who are in danger. And when you have the opportunity to practice giving Dharma to others, you do that as well. It doesn't mean preaching, it doesn't mean standing on a soapbox, but it means sharing the Dharma in a way that is natural and provides relief to others' minds. Those are all ways to practice generosity. And that's the first of the 6 perfections. So just think of our activities throughout the day, and we can find different places to practice generosity every day. Even just giving a kind word when someone's in distress, that's an act of generosity. You're giving fearlessness, you're giving protection. Comforting someone who's grieving is an act of generosity, if you do it with the right mind. So we can incorporate generosity into all of our activities. Then the next of the 6 is morality, or ethical discipline. So the primary cause for ethical discipline is renunciation. So renouncing all the pleasures of samsara, right? We talked about renunciation. Giving up samsara's delights. And what morality is, its essence, is protecting our mind. And we say morality is one of the primary causes for a perfect human rebirth in the future. And so the fact that we're blessed with a perfect human rebirth in this life shows us that we had good morality in past lives, because we created the causes to be reborn as humans. And so we need to continue that. So one way we practice morality is by taking vows, the vows of individual liberation. So if you have layperson vows, the 5 vows of a layperson, those are called, those are in the category of vows of individual liberation. And then there's bodhisattva vows. And then there's tantric vows. But just taking vows isn't morality. Actually protecting the vows, living with the vows, that's morality. So there are again 3 types of morality. There's the morality to give up, the resolve to give up negative actions is one type of morality. There is the morality of wanting to engage in virtuous actions, to gather virtue out to yourself. That's the second type. And then there's the morality that's dedicating yourself to the welfare of others. So recognizing that your ethical discipline is done with the purpose of benefiting others and always working towards their ends. So those are 3 types of morality. So the first one is the one we most think of, right? Giving up the 10 non-virtuous actions. So we know the 10 non-virtuous actions. You don't have to have vows to not practice them. The 10 non-virtuous actions are non-virtuous by nature. So whether you vow not to do them or not, if you engage in them, you automatically accumulate negative karma or non-virtue. So there's the 3 non-virtuous actions of body. So killing, stealing, and engaging in sexual misconduct, right? Then there's the 4 non-virtuous actions of speech. So lying, engaging in harsh speech, engaging in divisive speech, and gossip or idle gossip or chatter. And then there's the 3 negative or non-virtuous actions of mind. So jealousy or covetousness, and then malice or ill will, and then wrong views, especially views that don't believe, or views that propound that the laws of cause and effect, karma, cause and effect don't exist, and views that say the self is inherently existent are wrong views. So the morality of resolve to not engage in negative actions is explicitly working against those 10, but also any other negative action we may take. And so how do we let morality infiltrate our everyday lives? Well, if we've taken any sets of vows of individual liberation, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, committing ourselves to keeping those vows pure and strong and living by them is a practice of morality. But then we can just think in our lives, any action we do to avoid the 10 non-virtues and to adopt the 10 virtues, so the opposite of those 10, right, are the 10 virtuous actions, is a type of morality. acting in a way that's harmonious to the teachings of the Buddha to accumulate merit and virtue is a type of morality. And then working for others, realizing that the effort we put into benefiting our minds is for the purpose of helping others. It's a type of morality. Sultrim, ethical discipline. So those are the 3 types of morality we need to practice. Then the third of the 6 paramitas is patience. Patience actually has as its basis compassion. And what patience is a mind, the role or goal of patience is to keep your mind undisturbed. And the result, or one of them, is that actually you become more attractive to others. I don't mean like physically, I just mean like in an emotional way. Though some texts say physically as well. You have a beautiful appearance. They say ethical discipline has like an aroma. So like the smell, the beautiful, delicious scent of ethical discipline and the beautiful appearance of patience. But so patience is not letting our mind become disturbed. So there's 3 types of patience as well. There's the patience that doesn't become agitated or take offense at harm that is done towards us. So this is a difficult patience to cultivate, but it's really important that when others harm us, we don't take offense at it and we don't get agitated by it. Any external harm doesn't cause our mind to waver up and down, to become unsettled. That takes effort. So practicing patience gives us that resolve, that strength. Then the second patience is the patience that accepts suffering willingly for the purpose of the Dharma. So this doesn't mean going and seeking out suffering. There's enough suffering in samsara. You don't have to go look for it. But it means being willing to put up with difficulties in order to practice Dharma. So for instance, when there's a Dharma teaching, having to travel, I guess this is over Zoom, so there's no traveling, but like having to travel 20 minutes out of your way to go to a Dharma center to attend a teaching, or having to sit in a somewhat uncomfortable position for a few hours to attend a teaching. Those are types of, coarse physical suffering. But being willing and joyfully enduring those for the sake of studying Dharma is a type of patience. And it builds up your mind in this way to allow your mind to stay stable and unperturbed. So willingly accepting suffering for the purpose of Dharma. Again, not seeking out suffering. I can't say that enough. It's very romantic, this idea of like taking on suffering. That's not the goal. It's recognizing that there is suffering happening, willingly and joyfully accepting it to practice Dharma. And then there is the patience that maintains an interest and develops certainty about the Dharma. So this is especially important when you're studying difficult Dharma topics that may have a lot of points or may seem like they have no impact on your life. I know that especially in the basic program, so another one of the programs FPMT offers, there is a class on the tenets, so the different philosophical schools of Indian Buddhism that eventually developed into what we call the Prasangika school, which is what we practice. But you go through all the different tenets, including the ones that aren't practiced anymore. And it's so confusing. And there's like a lot of things to learn about. And you say, why am I doing this? Like, how is this helping me? And there is benefit. There's huge benefit. Because by understanding the other Buddhist schools, and seeing how their interpretation is incorrect, that helps you refine your own understanding. So there is benefit. But it's hard to see that benefit sometimes, right? So you can become overwhelmed and just say, like, there's no point in doing this study. Because I don't understand how to apply it to my life right now. This is all useless. This also can happen when you try to study emptiness. This is too esoteric for me. It's too difficult. So patience is developing the wish to continue studying Dharma, to develop certainty in it, even when it's difficult, even when it makes no sense. That's a type of patience. Okay. So then the next, after generosity, morality, and patience, we have vigilance or joyful effort. And so joyful effort, there are 3. There's the armor-like joyful effort, armor-like vigilance, which is joyfully being courageous in the face of obstacles. And there is the vigilance of gathering virtue, which is to say practicing the other perfections. And then there's the vigilance of benefiting sentient beings. But really, when I think of vigilance, what vigilance or endurance or joyful effort does is it combats laziness. And there are 3 types of laziness. And that, for me, is more useful to think about. So the first type of laziness is what we think of. The laziness that's kind of sloth or sluggishness. But the next laziness is the laziness that wishes to engage in activities that are non-dharma. So the wish to, go to the movies instead of going to a dharma teaching, we say that's a type of laziness. Okay. Even though it seems like you're doing something, you're not just sitting on the couch, you're not doing nothing. It's actually a type of laziness because you're avoiding dharma activity. And then the third type of laziness, which for me is a really important one, is the laziness that is like, I guess we'd say self-deprecation. So it's saying, well, I'm not good enough to do that practice. I'm not smart enough to study that topic. I haven't practiced long enough to engage in that level of meditation. Putting yourself down in that way is a type of laziness because it's preventing you from engaging in dharma activity. It's preventing you from moving forward on the path. So it's considered a type of laziness. And so joyful effort is designed or meditated on and cultivated to overcome those 3 types of laziness. And that last one, for me, all 3 types of laziness are pretty much present all the time. Anytime you see me, I'm probably practicing one of them very strongly. I'm good at it. But that last one for me is especially difficult to overcome because you always want to, on one hand, study more deeper topics, right? You want to keep studying. I'm part of a 20-year study program here to become a Yeshe. And then, continuing my tantric studies every day and doing all these things. You want to study more, but sometimes you read these and you say, this is way over my head. I'm never going to be smart enough to do this. Why should I even bother? That self-doubt is always there, okay? At least for me, it's very present. And so realizing that when I let that self-doubt be a reason for not engaging in dharma, all it's doing is laziness. So I need to develop the joyful effort, the endurance, the vigilance that looks at that self-doubt and says, all you're doing is harming me. True, I may not understand this material right now. True, I may not have a strong enough mind of meditation to engage in really deep practices, but I can do my best. And even if I don't get everything now, I'll get little bits and pieces, and that will push me forward. And I'll create imprints. So even if I don't get it now, I'll understand it better in the future. You have to take the extensive view combined with the relaxed view, right? I'm not going to understand everything today. And there's so much to understand, it would be impossible. But I'm going to do the best I can and be relaxed while I do it. So that's overcoming laziness with vigilance. And then the last 2 of the 6 perfections are concentration and wisdom. So concentration, it has the function of bringing about bliss and pliancy. So when you study, shamatha meditation or calm abiding meditation, one of the characteristics of achieving it is you have physical and mental pliancy and the bliss of physical and mental pliancy. And so pliancy here, Shintu Jalwa, means like an adaptability, right? An ability to exist in all circumstances in a harmonious way. And the bliss of mental pliancy that comes from achieving this calm abiding, right? So calm abiding, they say, any of us can achieve calm abiding in this life, even if we have no experience meditating. Pabonka Rinpoche says that if you go do a retreat for 6 months to a year, where you do nothing but practice calm abiding, anyone can achieve it, even if they have no prior experience. I don't know if it's that easy, but the point is that it's something we can all do in this life. And even non-Buddhists, it doesn't have to be focused on a Buddhist topic to achieve calm abiding, because this is a type of mind that is single-pointedly focused on its object of meditation. But that comes with this bliss that they say, the mental bliss that you experience, they say it's thousands of times more blissful than an orgasm, the bliss of an orgasm. Having a bunch of monks write that down is also a little strange. And you say, okay, that's an interesting thing for you to say. But the point is that by working on our mind in this way, right, one of the functions of calm abiding and concentration is to bring about this pliancy and bliss. So the reason that bliss comes is because when your mind is that subdued, that calm, then it doesn't have any space for negative experiences to come because it's so focused, right? And when you take that focused mind and it's pliant, has this pliancy, right? This ability to adapt, then you can point it towards any virtuous object and achieve deep understanding of that object, right? So from calm abiding, we have what's called vipassana, right? Insight meditation. So that's the next level that comes after calm abiding. But you need calm abiding as the basis, your ability to have a mind that is able to single-pointedly focus on any object it wants without any difficulty and without any effort, engage in this type of meditation. And then from there, you engage in analysis, right? You meditate, and from your meditation, you achieve Lekden, vipassana, so an insight meditation, or insight into that object. So that's the benefit of calm abiding. We need it to develop greater understanding of all the Dharma topics. And so concentration is marked by having pliancy and bliss, but it's also marked as bringing about worldly accomplishments and siddhis. So a siddhi is like a supernatural power that you can achieve, such as flying, or what are some of the other ones? There's 8 common siddhis: flying, being able to eradicate illness, things like this, that they don't have any benefit on their own. They're only beneficial if they're applied to Dharma. But those can come about through concentration because they're all powers of the mind. And then the last type of concentration, or it's understood as the way it benefits others. So even though what concentration is doing is developing your mind, it's understood in the context of benefiting others. So that's the perfection of concentration. And the last one is the perfection of wisdom. So the main type of wisdom is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So the ultimate wisdom, or wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of reality. Then there's also the wisdom that recognizes conventional reality. So just what we think of as everyday wisdom. And then there is the wisdom that wants to practice wholesome activities for the benefit of other sentient beings. And the truth is, we talk about these 6 perfections, but they're often divided into 36 perfections, which is to say each of the 6 contains the other 6. So you have, in the perfection of generosity, you have the generosity of generosity, and you have the morality of generosity, and the patience of generosity, and the vigilance of generosity, concentration of generosity, and the wisdom of generosity. So every of the 6 work that way. So you can see that there's ways to practice them interwoven together. It's not like you have to practice one and then the other. You weave them together and you make all of your life's activities pervaded by these 6. You know, it's imperative that we practice Dharma, which is part of the reason getting rid of laziness is so important. And having the vigilance, the vigilant aspect of all 6 paramitas. Lama Zopa says, you know, we think our lives, we don't have minds that are able to realize how deep our suffering can actually be. And so, for instance, what he says is, if you could get into the mind of an animal, even for one moment, you would experience such suffering that you would practice Dharma so fervently you would never sleep again. That's how much suffering there is in the animal realm. Even though we can look at those animals, especially our household pets, and think they have these lives of luxury, he says, no, the suffering there is so intense, that if you could be in that mind for one moment and remember that suffering, you would do nothing but practice Dharma. You would never sleep again. You'd be so terrified of being reborn as an animal. And you need that type of effort in all of our Dharma practice. It's critical, you know, overcoming laziness. And so when we practice with these 6 perfections, it helps us remember that all of our problems don't come from objects or external circumstances. Our real problem comes from our belief in those external objects or circumstances as being truly existent. Our clinging to them as being real. That's where our problems come from. And similarly, our clinging to ourself as being truly existent. That's where our problems come from. That's why wisdom is so important. So wisdom needs to guide all of your practice of perfection. They say if you only practice the first 5 without wisdom, it's like a group of 5 blind people leading each other around near the edge of a cliff. But then wisdom comes, and they're the eyes that are able to guide. So we need wisdom in all we do. And we talked about that in the past, about having compassion, but not wise compassion. So just, driving down the street and throwing money out your window is not a real wise way to be compassionate, even if some people get some benefit, right? So we need wisdom mixed with our compassion. So when we practice the 6, we need wisdom. Okay, this is again, time has caught up with me. So we're going to go through the vows now, I think. And then, my plan, I looked over what we wanted to review for today's session. And I said, oh, there's not a lot of material. I'll have time for a nice long meditation. Because every week I've had to make my meditation shorter and shorter and shorter because I just babble on too much, right? So I have like a nice long meditation planned, and there's no way we're going to have time for the whole thing. So it's going to be another quick one, I think. But I think the vows are important to talk about. Some of you may have taken vows recently. Some of you may be looking forward to taking them in the future. Vows are a really powerful thing. Vows are the source of virtue, source of morality. The reason they say making offerings to the Sangha, to the conventional Sangha, which is to say nuns and monks, is so beneficial is because of their vows, and they're living in the vows. So by living with vows, you make yourself an object of offering and an agent of virtue in the world. And so that's not just true for monastic vows. That's true for layperson vows, the 5 vows of a layperson. It's true for bodhisattva vows. It's true for tantric vows. So practicing the vows makes you an agent of virtue, right? An object of admiration and offering. And what it does, the vows don't stop you from doing things that you might want to do. They don't hold you back. What vows do is they teach you how to live a life that's meaningful and is avoiding non-virtue. If you have a mind that says these vows aren't letting me do the fun things I want to do, then you can't keep those vows very long. It's very easy to give them up. And as a fully ordained monk, we have 253 vows. So if I have the mindset that, wow, there's all these fun things I want to be doing, but my vows aren't letting me do it, you're not going to stay a monk very long. And similar to the bodhisattva vows, if you say, well, I really want to practice bodhicitta, but these vows seem silly, I'm not going to practice all of them, then you won't really practice bodhicitta very long. So what the vows do is they teach us how to practice bodhicitta, and they kind of keep us on the path. They're like have you ever, these days when you go bowling and they have instead of having the gutters, they have railings in the gutter, so you can't get a gutter ball. It's that's what our vows are. They're preventing us from getting gutter balls. I haven't gone bowling in a long time. I'm from New England, so we do candlestick, old school bowling, not just 10-pin. Anyway, our vows are there to keep us in line and to help us. So we need to think of how the vows exist to protect us from harm. And so they keep our bodhicitta active. They keep it moving in the right direction. And they keep it from degrading. Now, the great thing about the bodhicitta vow, the bodhisattva vows, is that you can take them on your own. So ideally, you take them from a Lama, but for the first time. But when you do where you take them from the Buddha, and after you have received them, we recite them every day. So you take them fresh every day. And by doing that, it keeps them from degenerating and keeps them really active in your mind. So they're not just something on the back burner, but something you keep in the front. You can't take your vows of individual liberation every day like that. You remind yourself of them, but you can't actively take the vows. But the bodhisattva vows you can, on your own. And when you take bodhisattva vows, you take them not just to the end of this life, but you take them until you achieve enlightenment. So they exist in your continuum beyond just this life. And other vows don't do that. Other vows end at the end of this life of this body. But the bodhisattva vows can continue from life to life if they aren't degenerated. So when we want to protect our wishing bodhicitta, and we want to protect it in this life, the first thing they suggest is that we remember the benefits of bodhicitta. I think last class I went over the traditional list of 10 benefits, so I won't go over that again. You can it'll be listed in some of the files I shared with you. But just reminding yourselves of the benefits of bodhicitta is one of the ways to protect it. So again, we're talking about wishing bodhicitta. This all precedes the vows. Remind yourselves of the benefit of bodhicitta. And then you can contemplate and recite vows of aspiring bodhicitta every day, or a prayer for aspiring bodhicitta. And again, that's listed. There are numerous prayers to do that. You can recite we're supposed to recite our bodhisattva vows 6 times a day. So you recite it 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening, they say. And the bodhisattva vows are just 12 lines. It's a 12-line verse. And so you recite those 12 lines 3 times in the morning, 3 times in the evening, and contemplate them. You don't just it's not mere words. It's actually affecting your mind. And then you don't give up bodhicitta, they say, towards some mischievous sentient being. So what that means is when someone causes you harm, you don't decide, okay, well, I'm going to have bodhicitta towards these people, but not to that one because they've harmed me in some way. So one of the ways to protect your bodhicitta is, like I said, we talked about developing equanimity, right? And that's what this is talking about, not being selective with your bodhicitta. And then lastly, accumulating the 2 collections. So the collection of wisdom and the collection of merit. So what that means is studying the 6 perfections, practicing generosity and patience and diligence, trying to develop an understanding of emptiness and develop wisdom. So by doing those, you actually protect your bodhicitta because they go together. You know, developing bodhicitta makes realizing emptiness easier, and having some flavor or understanding of emptiness makes developing bodhicitta easier and stronger. So they work hand in hand. So those are 4 ways to guard your wishing bodhicitta in this life and to make this life more meaningful. And then ways to enhance your bodhicitta and to protect it in future lives. There are 4 actions to abandon and 4 to adopt. And the first one to abandon is knowingly lying or confusing your teacher or any holy being, whether it be an abbot or a teacher or something like this. So intentionally misleading them or doing something to confuse them. And this can even include if they ask you a question that you don't want to answer, if you kind of change the topic, right? So being knowingly misleading to a teacher or to a holy being, not all teachers are holy beings, but to both, you want to abandon that. That's one of the ways to help preserve your bodhicitta. And so what you want to adopt is deliberately avoiding lying and being truthful. So you abandon misleading teachers and holy beings, and you deliberately practice truthfulness with all sentient beings, and deliberately not lie or mislead all sentient beings. And that includes even telling jokes that, lying to someone for the sake of humor is considered a lie still. When I was living in Boston and working at Kurakula Center, one time Lama Zopa came for a teaching, and he stayed at the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. And at that point, they had just switched to a new building. They're based out of Lincoln, Massachusetts. And they moved 2 blocks away to a different house. This must have been in 2008, I think, or maybe 9. And he came for a teaching. And so he stayed there for a week or 10 days. And all of us, if you've ever been at a center when Lama Zopa comes to teach, it's a lot of work to host a teacher, especially Lama Zopa, and it can be exhausting. And it's full of joy and merit and bliss, but it's also a lot of work. And when he's there, there's so much energy. You just feed off of his energy, so it's very easy. But then when he leaves, you collapse, And so he was there for a week or 10 days or something. And it was the last day, and he was leaving. And I think he was scheduled to go down to North Carolina to start the teachings down there. But before that, he was taking a detour because they were trying to get visas to go to Hong Kong or to Mongolia or somewhere. I don't remember where. But so they, instead of going directly to the next teaching venue, they were taking this like 3 or 4 day detour to try to get visas. And so it's the last day, and Lama Zopa is doing private interviews with all of us at the archive. And Dr. Nick Rinpoche, who's the director of the archive, and I were like waiting out in the living room. And Roger, Venerable Roger, Rinpoche's attendant, goes, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, we're not leaving today because Rinpoche did a divination and he realized that there's no chance of us getting these visas. So we're going to go directly to North Carolina. So we're going to stay for another 4 days." And Nick and I just go, "Oh, okay." And then Roger like bursts out laughing. And he's like, "I'm just joking. We're leaving today. No matter what, we're leaving today." And Nick's like, "What are you doing? Like, that's against your vows." And Roger just kind of laughed. And then immediately Wendy Cook finished her interview with Rinpoche, and she came out of the bedroom or the shrine room. And she goes, "Oh, okay." And she goes, "So now Rinpoche is doing a divination to see how the visas are going to go." And then Roger laughed. And he's like, "Wait, are you serious?" Wendy's like, "No, yeah, he's really doing a mo right now." And Roger's like, "Oh, no, he can't finish that mo because we have to leave today. It doesn't matter what the mo says, what the divination says." So Nick says, "There you go, right there. Your karma was just paid back right away." So then Roger ran into the room to stop the divination because he said, "We have to leave today. The divination comes up bad. We still have to leave today." But so he was, making a joke, and it was very funny, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually technically a way to break your vows and to cause your bodhisattva vows to degrade by lying, even if it's as a joke. So we want to adopt the action of always being truthful. The second one, we want to abandon discouraging others from practicing virtue. And we want to adopt the mind that is always encouraging others to engage in virtuous activity and rejoices in their virtuous activity and has love and compassion towards them when they engage in difficult virtuous activity. So this can be like if someone is deciding, well, should I go to the Dharma Center today to the teaching, or maybe I'm just going to go to the movies instead. And you say, "Oh, you get so tired when you go to the Dharma Center, just go to the movies. You deserve a good weekend, or don't go do that retreat. You deserve a spa weekend." So discouraging the act of virtue is deleterious to your bodhisattva vows, and encouraging virtue supports them. Then the third one is abusing a bodhisattva out of anger. So criticizing a bodhisattva or abusing them in some way. And what you want to adopt is never causing abuse to bodhisattvas in any circumstance. And the truth is, we don't know who are bodhisattvas or not. We don't have a mind. Until our mind is advanced enough, we can't perceive if someone's a bodhisattva or not. We only can judge their external activities, but their external activities don't indicate their state of their minds, right? We know that from our own experience and our own minds. So basically, we should never act out of anger towards any sentient being, just in case they're a bodhisattva or a Buddha. And then the last one is pretending to have good qualities that you don't have, or engaging in what looks like virtue, but with bad intentions, such as wanting reputation, fame, or profit for yourself. Abandon lying about your good qualities in that way. And you want to adopt the mind that doesn't discriminate against sentient beings. So instead of showing off what you perceive as your own good qualities so others like you, you recognize that all sentient beings are equal, regardless of their status in society or regardless of their education, their understanding of the Dharma, how new or advanced they are. And so you don't discriminate. So those are the 4 actions to adopt and 4 to abandon. And that leads us to the actual vows. And so there are 18 root vows that are called root downfalls, and then 46 secondary transgressions. And the thing with the 18 root downfalls is if you break one of them completely, then you lose all of the vows. They're all 18 are gone from your continuum, but you can take them again. If you don't break one completely, but you break it in part, then you still have the vows, but you need to restore them. But the act of restoring them and the act of taking them anew is kind of the same thing. So if you are constantly taking the vows every day, which is recommended as part of your practice, then you are always restoring the vows, even when you break them. But Arya Asanga says there's 4 gateways to losing your vows. And this goes for all levels of vows: individual liberation, bodhisattva, and tantric vows. And the first one is not knowing them. So that's why we're studying them. If you don't know the vow, it's very easy to break it, right? The second one is being careless. So even if you know the vows, not having any particular care about whether you follow them or not thinking they're important. And then the third one, after carelessness, is not having respect for the vows or respect for other sentient beings who are protected by those vows. So even if you understand the vows and you're not careless with your actions, you're aware of everything you're doing, but you don't respect the vow, you don't think it's worthwhile, then that's one way for you to lose it quite easily. And then the last one is being overwhelmed by your deluded minds, such as attachment, So we have a vow against stealing. So if I don't know about the vow against stealing, that's the easy way to break it. But if I know there's a vow against stealing, but I just don't care about it and I'm careless, then that will lead me to take things, to engage in it. Or maybe I'm very careful. I don't steal things like on accident, but I don't care about the vow. I don't have any respect for it or for other beings. Then that would lead me to steal. But even if I have all those things, I understand the vow, I'm very careful about my actions, and I respect the vow, I see how it's beneficial, but I have very strong attachment and jealousy that could still lead me to break that vow, right? So those 4 gateways, we have to guard them because those are the easiest ways for us to break our vows. And so before we go into the vows, the one other thing to talk about is that in order to break a vow, this has gone way longer than I thought. In order to break a vow completely, there are 4 what are called binding factors. So failing to regard the action you've done as wrong is the first one. So when you do something but don't think what you've done is actually wrong, that's the first binding factor. The second one is not abandoning the thought that you'll do this action again. And then the third one is rejoicing or admiring the action you've done. So, when you steal something, but not thinking that it's wrong for me to do so, and then not having a mind that says, I'm never going to steal again, but instead has I got this nice thing, so maybe I'll continue doing it and being happy. And then having no shame or consideration for others is the fourth. So in order to fully break one of the bodhisattva downfalls, you have to have all 4 of those components. So if you break a vow, but you know that it's wrong and you don't want to be breaking it and immediately have the mind that says, I don't want to do this again, I wish I wasn't doing this, then you haven't broken it completely. You've only degraded it, So you repair it instead of taking it over again. So those 4 binding factors have to be present, with the exception of 2 vows. 2 vows, you don't need those 4. So we'll talk about those. So we only have about a half hour left. Our meditation seating is going to be very short. I'll run through these vows and then see how long it takes. And then maybe we won't do a meditation. We'll just do Q&A. We'll see. We'll see how timing goes. So the 18 root vows, these are the most important ones. And the truth about all these vows, it's easy to be overwhelmed, right? There's 18 vows. That's hard enough. Then you add 46 secondary ones. The truth about the secondary ones especially, and all of them, is that, not all of them, most of them, is that they're powered by negative minds. So a lot of them, if the actions only become breaking the vows when you do them out of anger or attachment or jealousy. So as long as you're always working to have virtuous minds, it becomes very easy to protect yourself from breaking these vows. So if it feels overwhelming that there's so many that you have to try to memorize or learn, just remember, if I'm always working with a virtuous mind and I'm doing everything I can to get rid of minds of attachment and anger and miserliness and jealousy, then by doing that alone, I'm acting in accordance with the vows. So the first vow, the first of the root vows, is praising yourself or belittling others out of attachment or jealousy. I don't think I'm going to give too much commentary on these. I'm going to go through them, and then if there are questions, we can have those at the end. But time is snuck away from me. So the first one is praising yourself or belittling others. And they actually said that this vow is parallel to the vow. If you look at the 4 root vows, right? So for those of you that have householder vows, so vows of individual liberation, there are 4 root vows, right? There's the vow of not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, and not lying. And then the fifth vow is not to take any intoxicants. But the first four are considered root vows. And those root vows are parallel for all types of individual liberation vows. So all monks and nuns have those same four root vows. The only difference is instead of a vow of no sexual misconduct, we have no sexual activity. But otherwise, they're the same. And so the first four bodhisattva root downfalls parallel for the four root vows of individual liberation. So they say that praising yourself or belittling others out of attachment or jealousy is similar to engaging in sexual misconduct. And then the second vow, even though you are able to, not giving material aid to others due to miserliness, or not teaching Dharma to those who are suffering because you, for any reason, but especially because you don't want to share your knowledge. That's the second one. So not giving to others when you're able to, either giving in a material way or giving in a Dharma way. And so that's equivalent or parallel to the vow of not stealing or of stealing. And then the third bodhisattva vow is not forgiving others, but instead harboring a grudge due to anger or resentment. And so this is similar to killing, they say. And this doesn't depend on others apologizing. This doesn't depend on others having remorse, because it's not about others' minds. So if someone acts out towards you from out of anger or anything else, even if they don't apologize, out of your own anger, your own resentment, holding a grudge and not forgiving them is breaking a downfall, a root downfall. It doesn't matter their behavior, their minds, if they actually want to atone or not, because it's not about them. The vow is about your practice, your mind. The next root vow is abandoning the Mahayana teachings by saying that some part of them are not correct or accurate, and instead maybe making up your own interpretation of those teachings. So that is parallel to the vow of lying. So abandoning the Mahayana teachings. So the Mahayana teachings are especially the teachings understanding the nature of reality and the teachings understanding Bodhicitta. Right. The fifth is taking back offerings you've given to the Buddha, Dharma, or Sangha, or whether by robbery or by other nefarious means. Or if something was dedicated to the Sangha, you taking that and using it for your own means. So we recognize that the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are the objects of refuge. And anything offered to them shouldn't be taken, it shouldn't be stolen from them or misappropriated in some way. And so to do so, you break your bodhisattva vow. The sixth one is it's despising or criticizing the Holy Dharma by criticizing any of the schools. So if you, not just the Mahayana, but if you criticize the practitioners of Hinayana or the tenets that they follow, or if you are particularly, appreciate practicing Tantra, so you criticize those that only practice Sutra like this, that's breaking a vow. So, these vows are what define Mahayana Buddhism, is the Bodhisattva vows in many ways. Yet, very, very critical to them is saying any criticism of the Hinayana schools is breaking your vows, which is really important. Because the Hinayana schools and the contemporary Theravadan schools all follow the teachings of the Buddha, right? And it may not be the teachings of the Buddha that we follow. And we can say that some of their views may not be the final intention that the Buddha gave. So that's allowed, to be critical of what they believe and to compare it to what we believe. But that's not the same as criticizing the Dharma, to say this isn't really the teachings of the Buddha, or this isn't really Buddha Dharma, or criticizing them. So all of the vehicles of the teachings of the Buddha we have to uphold with respect. Then the next is harming an ordained person, whether by inflicting violence on them or imprisoning them or stealing from them or engaging in behavior that causes them to lose their vows. And then the next is committing any of the 5 heinous actions or the actions of immediate retribution. So those are to kill your mother, to kill your father, to kill an arhat, to cause a division in the Sangha community, or to intentionally draw blood from a Buddha. So those are the 5 heinous actions, so-called. And so to commit any of those is breaking your bodhisattva vows. Then the 9th one, and this one is important to remember because this one doesn't require the 4 binding factors. So to cultivate and hold any wrong view, especially a wrong view that denies the existence of the 3 jewels of refuge, or a wrong view that denies the truth of the causes and effects of karma, to hold that view and cultivate it is immediately, it constitutes a downfall. It doesn't have to have those 4 factors we mentioned earlier. The failure to regard it as wrong, the wish to not continue doing it again, the joy or admiration in doing it, and the lack of concern for self or others. It doesn't have to have those, because they say that holding on to wrong views of any sort, such as denying the truth of cause and effect, it undermines the ability to believe that bodhicitta is useful. So if you hold these wrong views and cultivate them in such a way that is antithetical to the teachings of the Buddha, then there's no basis for your bodhicitta to keep root, right? There's no place for your vows to remain. So that one, the 9th one, doesn't need the 4 binding factors, cultivating and holding wrong views. The next one is generally one of the easier ones to not break. So it's to not destroy any town or country through methods such as fire, bombs, pollution, or black magic. So hopefully none of you are doing that. So that's one of the easier ones. It's nice to have like a gimme, like ones that are very easy to keep, That includes, though, like harming any structure where people are living. And then teaching emptiness to those who are not ready to understand it. That's the next one, the 11th one. So I mentioned that earlier. It's very easy to misunderstand emptiness. So if you teach it to those who aren't prepared for it, you can cause confusion, and you can cause them to abandon their own practice of compassion and bodhicitta. The 12th one is turning someone away from working to attain enlightenment and encouraging them to work for their own liberation. So the example is, if someone is wanting to do, working on developing bodhicitta, and you say, why don't you just work for individual liberation? Don't worry about others, only worry about your own happiness and escaping samsara for yourself. So this kind of advice, encouraging people in that way, is breaking a vow. Encouraging someone to break their pratimoksha vows. So pratimoksha, the vows of individual liberation. So whether that's the 5 vows of a layperson, the 36 vows of a novice, monk, or nun, or the 253 vows of a fully ordained monk, or the 318 vows of a fully ordained nun, encouraging anyone to break those vows is encouraging someone else to break their vows is itself breaking one of your bodhisattva vows. And then the 14th is causing others to hold incorrect views about the Hinayana, or belittling the Hinayana teachings. So for instance, if you say, well, the people that practice Theravada today, there's no place to practice compassion in the Hinayana practice. That's not true, right? That's a misunderstanding. So causing disunity among the Sangha by causing misunderstandings and propagating incorrect views about the teachings of the Buddha. So you can say, well, it's true that the Theravada they don't have an idea of bodhicitta as being central to their practice. And they don't have the idea of achieving complete and perfect Buddhahood for the benefit of others as being central to their practice. So that's true. That's not a criticism. But if you say, oh, the Hinayana don't practice compassion, or the Hinayana, only care about themselves, they don't care about anyone else, that's incorrect, right? That's that's not founded in the teachings. So holding that view, as we mentioned earlier, that's one of the earlier vows, to hold a wrong view. But then to cause others to share that view is also breaking a vow. Then the 15th is proclaiming you have realizations of emptiness that you don't. So that's pretty self-explanatory. The 16th is accepting gifts that you know have been stolen or embezzled from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or from a monk or nun. And this actually includes things like, if you're going to say a Lama Chopa and you have offerings and you bought all these offerings specifically to make them at the Lama Chopa, but then you get a little hungry. So you're like, well, I'm just going to have one package of biscuits. I'll just eat these, and that's fine. That's actually considered stealing from the triple jewel, because you bought them with the intention to dedicate them and offer them to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so now you've taken them for yourself. So it's actually considered stealing, and it breaks your bodhisattva vows. And then only two more. This is a strange one. Basically, it says taking material from someone who's meditating on calm abiding and giving it to someone who is doing recitation. But what that means is establishing kind of unfair practices, or engaging in biased action. So if there's some person doing a certain type of meditative retreat or practice, and you kind of discourage that, but you want to encourage a different type of practice. So you say, well, our Gompa, our meditation hall, is only available to practice mindfulness meditation, for 1 hour a day. But for those of you practicing Tantra meditation, you could practice 3 hours a day, something like this. So engaging in unfair or biased activities, so where you're encouraging one and discouraging another. And then lastly, abandoning your own bodhicitta by thinking that I can't help sentient beings. I'm not good enough. There's too much suffering. I don't want to help other sentient beings. Any of these thoughts. And this last one, 18, similar to the first, to number 9, doesn't need to have the 4 factors. Just having this abandonment of bodhicitta itself is a complete downfall. Okay, so we only have 15 minutes left. That's not a lot of time. So what I'll just say about the 46 branch vows, or the secondary transgressions, are that they are grouped or categorized by relating to the 6 perfections. So when you read them, you'll see that the first 7 are all connected to the practice of generosity, such as, because of hatred or laziness, not answering a question that was asked sincerely, whether it's a Dharma topic or a non-Dharma topic, if you're capable of answering it, but due to your own hatred or laziness, not answering it, So that's considered related to generosity. And then the next 8 or 9 are related to morality, such as, performing actions which are of lesser benefit to others because of rigidly relying to your Vinaya. So I was just talking about this with my teacher the other day, because we were studying, the vows came up in the context of this Tantra text we were studying. And he said, for instance, as a monk, my upper robe, which you sometimes see the monks wearing, the yellow upper robe that we wear, we have a vow to always be with that as the sun rises every morning. So we have to keep it with us at all times. And so he says, well, if you're somewhere and you don't have your upper robe with you, and you have to stay at that place overnight, but you can help, you're requested to stay there to help them in some way. But you say, oh no, I can't stay and help you. I have to go home because my robe is there. Then you are refusing to help someone due to some small Vinaya infraction. So some small thing like this, right? So it's recognizing that as people that are trying to achieve Buddhahood, our main focus should be benefiting other sentient beings at all times. And so that's not to say you can break all of your pratimoksha vows willy-nilly, that they don't matter, but it's to say that if your priority is helping other sentient beings, that needs to be your priority. And so that vow is related to morality. And then there are an additional 4 that are related to patience. Again, similar to the first one, refusing to accept apologies. But the first one, as a root vow, we said not accepting someone's apology because of anger or spitefulness. And this is not accepting it out of laziness or attachment. So it's different, right? A little bit different. But that is related to patience. And then to perseverance, there are 3 related, and those all have to do with overcoming laziness or not falling subject to laziness. There's an additional 3 related to concentration. And then there's an additional 8 related to wisdom. And that includes studying non-Buddhist systems without any good purpose. So it's not saying don't study outside of the Dharma, but it's saying don't do it for no reason, Don't do it just because it's interesting. You should have a good motivation. So whether it's a philosophical system or a religious system, or even just a worldly thing that you're studying, you should always be doing it with a good motivation and with a proper idea. And so you shouldn't do it for no good reason. To do so would be to break one of these secondary vows. And then the remaining 12 aren't related to the 6 perfections directly, but they're related to the perfection of the morality of helping other sentient beings. And so such as not helping those in need when you have the ability to, or not providing condolences to those who are grieving, out of hatred or laziness, not working to make sure that those who are in your retinue or your circle are well taken care of. So your family and friends, or your people that work for you are being mistreated and not helping them. So the remaining 12 all relate to those. So the 46, I would say, as long as you always work to avoid acting out of anger or desire or attachment or hatred, it's very easy to keep those 46, because they all have to have this motivating factor of one of these negative minds. It's important to know all of them and to read them and study them, which is why I did provide that text for you. And you can find other resources as well. But don't be overwhelmed by them. Recognize that as long as your mind, you're always working to have a virtuous mind, and that is what is guiding your actions, then your actions will be in line with the actions of Bodhisattva. And so, as I mentioned, there's a 12-line prayer. I think many of you should know it. If you do any tantric practice, you'll probably see this. It comes up in the beginning of most tantric practices as well. And so this is the prayer to actually receive the Bodhisattva vows is the same one we take every day to restore them and to keep them fresh. We take it three times in the morning, 3 times in the evening. And so that's also included in the files. I was going to try to make a version of it to show you so we could recite it together, but my software wasn't really working. I couldn't get it to line up correctly, so that's okay. It's very easy to understand, It starts by taking refuge. And then it confesses all your negative actions. So those are, again, the first 2 branches of the 7-limb prayer anyway. And then it's rejoicing. So again, we talk about the 7-limb prayer all the time. It's bringing in all those aspects. So taking refuge, which is to say offering prostrations, confessing, rejoicing. And then it's embracing the mind of enlightenment, is how they put it in English. And committing to do that until you're enlightened, that all your activity, you treat all other sentient beings as your delightful invited guests, and all of your activities are done to please them and to guide them into the perfect bliss of Buddhahood themselves. And so in order to do that, you make the request, may I become a Buddha. So there's a 12-line prayer. It's very common. You can recite it every day in any language. A lot of us like to recite things in Tibetan because that's the way our teachers recite them. And there are some nice tunes and melodies which make them more pleasant, but it's important to know what they mean. So that's why I've been reciting these prayers in English. The refuge prayer I do, and then the last prayer, the dedication. And so once you know the meaning of this, if you are comfortable reciting it in Tibetan, or even the refuge prayer, right? Reciting in Tibetan can be very nice, and it connects you to the lineage of your teachers. But if you don't know what it means, it's just mindless syllables, doesn't matter. So you have to understand the meaning. So for most of us, at least starting by reciting them in English is more useful, including these 12 lines. And then if you feel the motivation to do it in Tibetan, that can be quite nice as well. It can cause you to have more imprints and more, connections to the Dharma. But we have to understand the meaning first. Okay, so I don't think there's time for a break or meditation in this class, unfortunately. That just shows how foolish I was to have this really elaborate meditation planned out. I said, the 6 perfections and the vows, that'll be really quick. No problem. We'll fly through it in 20 minutes. Obviously, I was wrong. So I will have time for questions, but I just wanted to say I really appreciated the time and the opportunity to spend time with all of you these last 6 weeks over these 6 classes. So for those of you that have come to all the classes, those of you who are new, have come to a few classes, it has been really wonderful to spend this time with you and to have the opportunity to be part of the center, Thupten Normal Ling, and to meet all of you. And going forward, you're welcome to ask me any questions. I'll share my email address in the chat. I think these are put on YouTube, so I don't really need to share my email address with all of YouTube, but I will put it in the chat. So you're welcome to email me at any time if you want to. If you have any questions about anything. But in general, there we go. In general, I had a really great time teaching this subject with you, and I really appreciate the invitation from Thupten Normal Ling and the chance to spend time with all of you. So I'm very grateful for spending time with you and for you choosing to come and be part of this class with me. So thank you very much. With that, we have a few minutes. So is there any questions that can be about anything we've talked about today or any of the other classes as well? I know I ran through those vows really quickly, and I apologize. But the book, the PDF I sent about the vows, explains them all with a little bit of commentary from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And so they're pretty easy to understand. And then if you have any doubts about them in the future, you're welcome to email me them. I'm sorry for going through so quickly, though. My time management skills obviously haven't gotten any better over the last 6 weeks.
I'm a little confused about how 4 and 7 of the secondary vows differ from number 2, the root vow.
Yeah, so it has to do with the motivation. So the fourth secondary vow is through hatred or laziness, not answering or giving wrong or distorted answers to others. But the second primary vow is not giving answers or material aid due to wanting to have knowledge for yourself. So it's out of attachment. So it has to do with a different motivation, you know? So it has to do whether you're guided by attachment or hatred is determining which of those, if it's a root vow or a secondary vow. So the thing about the secondary vows is that if you break them, you don't lose all of your vows. So the 18 vows, if you break one of them completely with the 4 binding factors, then all of the vows cease to exist in your continuum and you have to take them again in order to restore them. But if you break a secondary vow, or if you break one of the 18 but you don't have all 4 components, then you've degraded your vows and you have to restore them, but you haven't lost them from your continuum. So that's the difference in the weight of the vow is not as heavy. So to break one of the secondary ones, it may look like the action is the same as the root one, but the motivation is different. So that's the distinction.
It doesn't seem like there are a lot of consequences, though, to breaking any of them, the way there are for monks and nuns, for example, with the parajikas. If you break those, boom, you're out. You know what I mean?
Well, there's the first 4 root vows, like you said, the vows of individual liberation. If you break one of the first 4 as a monk or nun, you're no longer a monk or nun in this life. But that has to do with the nature of the vows being different. So the pratimoksha vows are only for this life, and the pratimoksha vows exist a different way in our continuum. So the bodhisattva vows we can take over and over again every day, even if we haven't broken them. Where the pratimoksha vows it's a more complicated way to compile them or to assemble them in our continuum. The important thing to think about the vows, though, is again, don't think of the vows only as their consequences of breaking them. Think of the vows as guardrails to keep you practicing bodhicitta. So if you think about them in like a way of punishment, right, and the negative consequences, that's not as useful as thinking of how they're promoting you to live a life of a bodhisattva. So you see them as guidelines to promote your living the life of a bodhisattva. That's a more useful way to look at them. But you're right. There's no, if you give up bodhicitta entirely, there's no like consequences because you can take it up again. That's true, right? But then but by having that attitude, then you say, well, you lose respect for the vows and say the teachings don't matter. They're inconsequential. And so that is in itself is creating a disrespect to the teachings. And it's creating a distance between your practice and the teachings. So they become harder to live with them because you don't have respect for them in that way.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, there's not the same type of quote unquote consequence, but there's still negative karma. If you take a vow and you break it, there's negative karma associated with it. Part of the difficulty or the danger of living in vows, as I mentioned, the more vows you hold, the more exponentially you accumulate merit, which is why they say that the merit that you can accumulate as an ordained person is like an ocean compared to like, a drop of water that you can accumulate as a layperson because we have so many more vows. Yet every one of those vows is another opportunity to break the vow. And by breaking a vow, you create much more negative heavy karma than if you engaged in the same action but didn't have a vow not to do it. So for instance, even just the action of killing, we know it's negative by nature. Anyone that kills accumulates negative karma, whether you have a vow not to kill or not. But if you have a vow not to kill and then you kill, then the negative karma you accumulate is even heavier because you not only have you done a negative action, but you broke a vow where you promised not to do it. So the same goes for all these vows. So even though breaking them may not have consequences like you can't take them again or something, you are creating negative karma by doing so. I don't know if that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any other questions? I know we're just about time. Okay, well, in that case, again, thank you so much for being here. And so let's try to end our time together by dedicating our virtue. So we want all of our activities to be virtuous in the beginning and the middle and the end. And so we try to make them virtuous in the beginning by setting a strong motivation to work for the benefit of others. And we make them virtuous in the middle by engaging in the study of the holy teachings of the Buddha and by trying to learn how to practice these teachings. And then we make them virtuous in the end by recognizing that we may have accumulated some merit. And instead of keeping that for ourselves, we dedicate that merit. We want to give it away so that that merit can ripen on all sentient beings, that they can all have happiness and all the causes of happiness, that they can also develop bodhicitta in their continuums, then they can continually work for their own welfare and the welfare of other sentient beings. So we will conclude by offering a brief dedication prayer. But before we do, just really have a mind that recognizes that through the 6 weeks together we've spent studying, maybe we've gotten a little bit of a flavor of bodhicitta. Maybe you've been able to kind of see through, whatever babbling and ramblings I've given and have gotten some better understanding. And so we rejoice in all of that understanding of the practice of the path that we've accumulated together. We rejoice in any virtue we've accumulated, and we rejoice in the virtue of all sentient beings, as well as all holy beings. And we recognize that any merit we've accumulated, we don't want to keep for ourselves alone. We want to dedicate it to all their sentient beings that they may be free from all suffering. So we give it away. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Again, everyone, thank you so much for spending your time with me the last 6 weeks. I really appreciate it. I've had a great time. I look forward to getting to spend more Dharma time with you all in the future. I hope you have a great evening. I hope the teachings have been useful in some small way. I hope the materials I've shared are useful. And yeah, take care.
Thank you, Lekden.
Thank you.